listening to Para X.
Welcome to Stirring the Cauldron. Now, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
Merry meet everybody, and welcome once again to Stirring the Cauldron here on the ParaX Radio Network. Tonight we're going to be delving into the world of Norse goddess magic with my guest Alice Karlsdottir. Now, Alice has been involved in the Germanic heathen revival for nearly 40 years, both as a student of Scandinavian and Northern European mythology and folklore, and has been a practicing Norse pagan. She's a master in the Rune Guild, has been a priestess in several kindreds, and contributed articles to a number of publications, and has given workshops and presentations on runes, tranceworking, and ritual at various festivals. As always, if any of you have any questions for Alice, please send them to me in private in the ParaX chat room. And for those of you who keep hearing about the chat room but haven't ventured over, you can come on over and join us at para-x.com. Alice, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's an interesting subject that I know nothing about, pretty much, well, a little bit, but not much. And this is what I like to do. I like to learn as well as my audience. So when I saw your book, I went, this is good. And simply put, I mean, what you've done is to rediscover the feminine side of the Norse pantheon and assemble working knowledge of the 13 Norse goddesses for both group ritual and personal spirit work. And that sounds like a daunting task in of itself, but how did you get involved with Norse paganism to begin with?
Well, my mother's side of the family is Scandinavian, and I had grown up on those myths. I think those may have been the first mythology I was ever introduced to. I know my mother used to read them to me, so it was before I could read. And so that was kind of my baseline. I really knew those before Greek or Roman or any of the other more commonly taught ones. And then years later in college, when I was introduced to paganism, that was the pantheon I was drawn to that I wanted to work with. So that's basically how I became involved with it. I just wanted to add that there are more than 13 Norse goddesses. That I just chose to work with 13.
You're right. Bad wording on my part. There are a great deal more. Okay, thank you for correcting that.
So that's how I became involved with that particular pantheon. And as far as a daunting task, I guess it just kind of happened gradually that, I was working with the Norse pantheon. I began working with a group in the 70s when I was living in Connecticut, in New Haven, Connecticut. And we did rituals. We were using the Norse gods. The ritual leader liked to use a god and a goddess often in a ritual, and I usually wound up having to do the research and write the invocations on the goddesses. And the problem was that there's a lot more written down or known about the gods than the goddesses. So I always felt like I was shortchanged and they had to do a lot of extra work. There's some of them that there's quite a bit of information on, but others there's not so much. And that's kind of how I got into the tranceworking side, that I had never been that good, I thought, at tranceworking or some of the more lunar kinds of magic. But because I needed to get more information, it occurred to me that people must have had other ways of contacting or learning about deities than reading books, especially in these pre-literate societies. So I thought I might use that to supplement what I knew by trying to use some more magical methods to get additional information, not to replace it, but to supplement what was available in texts.
Exactly. Well, I've had several comments from people since I posted the banner who were very much looking forward to the show tonight because they knew very little about the Norse tradition. Can you please give us a little bit of background? Because, we hear about so many other ones that we're more familiar with. For some reason, Norse is kind of not talked about so much or I don't know, written about.
It's kind of weird because when I say Germanic, it doesn't mean like Germany, but it's like a language group. And it includes England, Dutch, Scandinavia languages, Germany, some of the other places. So it's actually like people that have grown up in English-speaking countries. Those are actually, deities from, the cultures of a lot of people that have come from those areas. So it's a pity they don't know more about it. And there is actually quite a lot of material compared to some other pantheons or cultures that's written down, I think partly because Scandinavia was very isolated for a long time. It was kind of like the Boondocks, really. Even after they were Christianized, even after they were Christianized, they didn't really send bishops out there to teach them that much about Christianity, so they were really kind of only nominally Christian for even a few centuries afterwards, and they were Christianized late, and people just didn't, want to go off to Iceland or Norway, so some of those things didn't get confiscated or messed about with, and there are some texts. It's hard to know because the texts are later what people, back in the pagan society really did, but it kind of seems similar to what I think more people are familiar with, the Greco-Roman pantheon. That's what's classical mythology that you often encounter in school if they still teach that.
Exactly.
It kind of seems similar in a way. In fact, the Romans would give the names of Roman gods to the gods of Germanic people that they encountered, I guess, to try to kind of make sense of it based on some qualities, but sometimes they were a little wrong, or they kind of have a lot of the same structure, but it's kind of mixed together in a different way when you really look at it. And I think, too, Wagner in the 19th century wrote operas, the Ring Cycle, which used those figures, and he uses a lot of mythology, but his version is not exactly the way the real mythology was. And now I think Thor comic books, which have been made really popular by the movies, also use those figures with some real things, but, that's not exactly the way it is, too. So I think some people think they know something about some of these gods, like Thor or Odin, but what they know is maybe not exactly the way they
probably
were.
A lot more fictionalized than...
Yeah. It's kind of funny because some things are kind of true, so it kind of does give you a sense of it, but other things are not. So I think not only do people not know a lot, but the people who think they know something maybe don't exactly know the whole story or have some incomplete information.
Yeah.
It was, I think you think of the Vikings when you think of Norse society, maybe Germanic, because that was one of the later manifestations that people in Europe had more recent experience of. But that's kind of a distorted thing, because they're really, Viking kind of means, it's actually a verb. It means, to go off on a ship and raid or trade. And of course, the people who were on the receiving end didn't have a very positive view of it. But really, most of those societies were primarily farmers. Even the people that went Viking had their farms and their lands most of the time. And this was kind of like a side activity or something that young men did to sow their wild oats. And it's kind of the same structure of society that, like a lot of, I think, Northern Europe had, going back to the Bronze Age. But Odin is the chief god. The Romans compared him with Mercury because he was a god of wisdom and poetry, and he also had the function associated with the dead, and because Mercury was, one of his functions was a leader of the dead. I think that's how they made the connection. But he has a lot of other qualities, too. And he appears as the chief god. He's kind of a magician god and kind of has a wild quality, which you don't often find in the head of the pantheon. The more, probably better known, Thor with his hammer is the thunder god that would be probably more similar in a lot of ways to Jupiter or Zeus, except he wasn't the king god. So like they have a lot of the same qualities, but they're mixed together differently. And on the goddess side, Freya is probably the best known. She was associated with like love and beauty, sort of the same way Venus was, or Aphrodite. She was like a warrior goddess and a goddess of magic, and really had a lot more, probably a lot of different sides. And Frigg was Odin's wife, associated with women's skills and the home and the family. And she has these, there's 12 lesser goddesses that some of them are only mentioned by their name or one or two qualities that show up in a text called the Prose Edda, which is one of the two older texts that did survive. And those were the goddesses that I included in the book, because there's not very much known about them at all. And I kind of used them in the book to say something about these goddesses and to just kind of illustrate the technique that I used to work with them, to kind of give people an idea, how it was done. And so it's partly a book about these Norse goddesses and something about Norse culture, but it's also a book on a particular technique for researching deities or spirits using tranceworking and using research. And the idea is like you could use those techniques to work with gods or goddesses or any pantheon. So that's kind of what I was trying to do with the book. And I figured like if you could do it with these goddesses about which not much is known, that it would work, with anything.
Yeah, and I mean, some of them, I looked down the list, and some of them were familiar to me, some of them weren't, but you've done a very thorough job of identifying them and the rituals and the thing, and we'll get into all of that as we go along. But, you mentioned mythology, and that's very important. How does mythology and ritual fit together like they do?
Well, I see mythology. Mythology, it's like a way of, I really see mythology as a way that, like, the world of gods or divinity and the world of humans can kind of meet in a kind of language, a simple language that allows us to understand something about the gods, kind of a way to communicate. I'm not sure we can really perceive other worlds exactly the way they are from where we are, but it's almost dreamlike in some ways. That it's kind of a language of symbols and ideas that allow us to understand something about the gods and allow the gods to show them something of themselves in images that mean something to humans. And I think it is important that this idea of a dream time or an eternal present, that it's kind of talking about things. In one way you can say this is just like fairy tales, it's not true, but in a sense it really is truer than things we think are true, because they're ideas that are recurring and eternal in a way. And so those provide images and ideas that you could use in a ritual. Because I think ritual, one of the point of doing, I see the idea of tranceworking and that sort of thing as a way where we kind of try to go to the world of the gods and see something about them. I see ritual as a way that we call the gods into our world so that they can communicate with us here. And I think because magic or ritual, I think, requires concentration, but it also requires passion to work. That if you have some kind of emotional involvement, it lends it more power. And so images and sounds and smells in a ritual enhance that kind of involvement to give the ritual enough power to work. And I think a lot of that can come from mythologies because it has images that speak to us. The same way a lot of people use images on a tarot card, for example, to spark their imagination, to allow that part of themselves to work. And
that's part of that opening your mind and doing that is really, really important in any kind of magical work. And it should be important in everyday mundane life as well, I mean.
Yeah. Well, sometimes their images are recurring themes in mythologies it's kind of about situations or things that continue to happen in every age. It kind of tells us something about how we should, be or how the world is that maybe we don't understand if it was just presented in a dry, factual way, but experiencing in a myth or even a fairy tale. I mean, folk legends, to a lesser degree, have some of the same effect.
Yeah, well, when those things make things interesting, it makes learning interesting.
Exactly.
And I think that's the whole problem. If you're not stimulated by something, you're just going to in one ear out the other, or just the Charlie Brown thing, blah, 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 So, yeah, I mean, it's perfect.
It helps you remember it. Like you'll remember a striking story or an image from a myth more than you might remember facts.
Yeah, I had, I don't know what grade it was, but I had a teacher, we were learning Greek mythology, and this guy was a storyteller. I mean, a wonderful storyteller. And I so remembered some of the things, the myths that he taught us, like Icarus and Daedalus and, things like that. I mean, he just made it so colorful and wonderful that it stuck to this day, and you can't say that about a lot of things that you learn in school because it just, So, yeah. All right, I've got a question from the chat room. And she wants to know about the connection between Celtic and Norse pantheons. She said, like how Vikings came from Norse regions and Celtic is the Germanic cousin of Norse.
Well, it's not Germanic, but yes, they are closely related because there was a lot of interaction between the groups, both voluntary and non-voluntary. I think someone did a genetic study of Iceland when they started doing DNA sampling, and I think over half the country has Celtic DNA, so definitely, those people. And I think they shared, just being in Northeast Europe, some similar lifestyle things. The Celtic myths have their differences too, but I think you will see a lot of similarities in some of the figures. Ironically, there's not quite as much, even though Celtic imagery, I think, and art is very common, but there aren't as many actual texts from that time that survived as there are from say, the Scandinavian, just because I think part of what hurt them was that they had the Druids. I mean, it was good when their culture was thriving, but because they had a centralized priesthood, that when the Christian culture came in and wanted to get rid of it, it was easy to find the people, who were doing that. Whereas I think in Scandinavia, everybody was so isolated, and basically every head of a household was kind of their own priest, that it was probably harder to get rid of all the knowledge, right away. You'll see a lot of the art, like the idea of knotwork, is like Celtic has that knotwork.
Right.
Scandinavia has the same sort of thing. It kind of, there's some slight stylistic differences, but just even artistically wise, you can see similarities between the cultures.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to talk about trancework in a minute, but, in the book, you have the lore and trance and rituals for all the goddesses. When somebody wants to work with goddess, or any deity, actually, what are the most important things to keep in mind? In other words, I guess I'm asking, how can people find the right deity for them, in your opinion?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. I don't know if there is one right deity for you, but when you read the mythology, very often there will be some figures that speak to you or are more that you feel attracted to, which is one sign. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I don't know until I start working with a deity, if how good the connection is going to be, and until I start working, and then find out that some are harder. Definitely, some are harder to work with than others. I think sometimes that's a facet of just the deity themselves. Like some are more complex than others, but I think too, like some are harder for me to work with, which some other person might find easier to work with. And I think that that is that aspect that you have connections, stronger connections to some gods than others. I will say that over time, though, like if I work enough with the gods, I have managed to form some sort of connection with almost all of the ones in my pantheon, even the ones that I originally didn't think I related to as much. And that may be a function of practice, or it just may be that the older I grow and have more experiences, that I have a broader, experience and relate to different things. But I would suggest to just do as much research as you can on the deity or the pantheon of your choice. If you find someone that appeals to you, try to find everything about that. I'll say goddess, but it could be any deity. Try to read as much as you can. And I've kind of, this is kind of the process in the book. When you find factual information, then you might read fairy tales or legends from that period to kind of spark your imagination and kind of think it over, and then try doing a ritual to them to see, the point of doing the tranceworking initially, or the ritual, was to have them, show me something or tell me something, teach me something about themselves. And if you can make that initial connection, then you'll have some new images or information that you can use the next time you do it. And if it turns out that you don't feel like you are making a connection, or you don't feel close to that deity after trying it, several times, then you might try another one.
Yeah, and people are always talking about their experiences, and yeah, it may be good to listen to other people, but you also have to realize that everybody's different, and everybody communicates with somebody different. Like I've heard people say, "Oh, Odin is the best one to get in touch with," and other people are going, "Oh no, not Odin, not Odin, no," And the same goes for Loki. I mean, it's who you
start with Loki, maybe. He was my favorite god when I was a little girl. So, I don't know if that tells you something about me, but
in a good way.
I tried in the book to put my I put information from some of my tranceworking there, just examples, but I tried to put in a different typeface and be clear about which things I had found in textual sources and lore, and which things I were from my personal working. Because I agree with you. I think it's interesting sometimes to see what other people, think about a deity, but I don't think that any one person's personal experience of a deity is that's the way they are.
Right. Because they relate to us the way differently, because they know we're all different too. So, I mean,
And I think, like I said, it really is kind of, I'm not saying it's like a dream, but imagery-wise, it kind of is that sort of thing that, you will see same things about a god in symbols that mean something to you based on your personality and based on your background, and someone else may view it differently just because they have different experiences. Yeah. There's one goddess that I hear with a Texas country accent, and what I think that's trying to say is that she's kind of, being plain and simple, like a country woman, that kind of earthy thing. But if I was from England, I might hear her with a Yorkshire accent, or it's just, I am from Texas, and that's why I hear her that way, and that means something to me. But someone else might not hear that because it wouldn't mean the same thing. So that's an example. Or I've talked to a lot of people that see Freya differently. She's supposed to be a goddess of beauty. I think in a way people's idea of what a beautiful, woman looks like is different. So that may be partly why they see her different ways. she also can change shape, though, so that may be part of it, too.
Mm-hmm. There's a question in the chat room. She wants to know, did you say who your favorite goddess is? Or god?
Frigg was the goddess I was the most close to growing up, in some ways because I was interested in a lot of the, not so much mother and family, but she also seemed associated with crafts and spinning particularly, and I was kind of interested in those things as a little girl, but there's something about her that's very calm and wise that I felt drawn to. And I also really like Loki, who is, some people say that, he's evil and you shouldn't worship him at all, and other people kind of treat him like he's all fun and games and a joke, and I don't think he's either one, but he is very, very much an acquired taste and not something I work with in public necessarily.
Well, when I was in high school, my best friend had a cat, and its name was Loki, and I wasn't familiar with Loki, the deity. And I went up to her house, and, here's this really sweet cat walking around, and I bent down to pat it. She says, "Don't get down to its level." And I said, "Why not?" She says, "Because he'll go for your throat."
I noticed people that name a pet Loki seem to have some kind of issues with them. I think, in a way, when I was picking those two gods, I was drawn to Frigg because I felt like she was like me, and I was drawn to Loki because I felt like he was not like me. So, so that kind of gave me two.
Well, you need the yin and the yang. We all do.
Yeah.
That's who we are anyway.
I do. It's like...
Right. So in trance work, okay, so a lot of people are familiar with the term trance work in regards to mediums and seances. And they probably haven't realized that we use trance work in magical works as well. And in the book, you have a chapter called How to Do Trance Work, and it's very... very knowledgeably written. Is everybody capable of doing it? Here I'm asking you the basic questions. And are there perhaps some people who should not attempt it because there could be some potential dangers involved? It probably is not something you should do if you are experiencing any kind of emotional instability at that time until you get yourself together. I was very bad at trance working, and I kind of had to learn how to do it. Like, I've known people that did it very easily. Like, if you went to a festival and someone was doing a guided meditation, they could just snap right into it.
Yeah, but, or go to a magical site, they would, immediately fall into a light trance. And I had a very hard time doing it. And that's kind of one of the reasons I wrote the book, because if you can do something easily, you don't really think about how to do it. But you have to, if it's hard for you, you have to, think about the process and how you do it. And that's why I feel like if I could learn to do it, that almost anyone could. I also do theater, and I was at an acting workshop of some sort back in New York in the 80s. And they had a professional hypnotist who was, I don't know what he was talking to us about in acting class, but anyway, he was giving a lecture, and he kind of went through this process where he started doing, I guess, an induction, and then every once in a while he had us hold up our hands or try to raise our hands, and he'd say, try to raise your hand, and after the first or second time, a lot of people couldn't raise their hands and other people could. And he kind of went on, and as he went on, more and more people couldn't raise their hands. And the point of his thing was that, I can't remember how many levels there were, but he was saying there's so many levels of induction and that anyone could be hypnotized, but some people took more levels than others, that it was harder for some people to be hypnotized. And that was I had just always assumed I couldn't do trance working, that it was one of those things you could either do or you couldn't do. I don't know, having talent in certain areas. But that made me think that maybe my problem with it was that I just hadn't done the induction long enough,
Mm-hmm.
So I started working, and a lot of the stuff books on self-hypnosis or hypnosis in general have some very useful techniques that, it's a trance is a trance, whether it's for magic or, hypnosis and medical
Mm-hmm.
things. It's like the idea of how you go into a trance is really kind of the same. It's what you choose to do with it afterwards that makes it different, if you're going to use it for ritual or magic or therapy or whatever. So those are some good techniques that you can use, and I just basically tried them all and combinations, and I finally found a combination that worked for me.
Mm-hmm.
Probably a lot of people wouldn't have to do, as many things as I do, and I've shortened it over the years because I guess I've gotten better at it, but I literally kept like lab books when I did these things when I was first learning to do it, like you do in science class, where I'd write down the circumstances, like what time, with the moon phase, it's time of the month, time of night, rather what the weather was like, to try to see if there were, is it harder when it's raining than it is when it's not, and it was just kind of, I was trying to find the optimum conditions. Since I had trouble, I figured I should, do it under the best circumstances I could. And one of my teachers, swore by a particular technique that never worked for me, so I didn't use it anymore. But I think different people, different things would work for some people, and maybe others wouldn't like it. But there's so many different ways. Just all these things like counting down and imagining going downstairs or an elevator or water. There's a lot of images, standard images for going into hypnosis that you can use, and some of them will work, for you eventually.
You got to find the right one, and
right.
In the book you talk. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I just said the other thing is when I do these tranceworkings with goddesses, I always do it within a ritual. Like I set up ritual areas a certain way, but however you set up a magic circle or whatever you use, I don't think it's a good idea, especially when you're starting out, to just like going to a trance anywhere. I think you should protect yourself both physically and psychically. So
exactly, and I was just going to say that in the book you talk about similarities between trancework and astral projection. So if there are people out there that do astral projection easily, or at least know the technique, it's just kind of one thing kind of falls into the other. So I never say never to anybody, because I said I couldn't be hypnotized, and I was. It took a while, but it happened, and I didn't think I was hypnotized until he took this very long needle. It was a doctor, actually, so I felt safer. Took a very long needle and picked up, the skin on my forearm, and then put the needle right through it. And I'm looking at it, and I'm thinking, that didn't hurt. This is weird. I'm not even hypnotized. Duh. Obviously I was, because if I was in my right mind, I would have said, put that down now, So,
I've had the same experience that sometimes when I do it, especially when I was experimenting, I would think it wasn't working. And then when I came out of it and ended the ritual, I realized that like a long period of time had elapsed when I was unaware of it. So I realized something actually had been happening.
Yeah.
And sometimes it works better than others. It could, it's very, especially if you're not good at it, like me, and especially in the beginning, like my physical condition, the weather, the temperature, like a lot of different things could hinder it, or sometimes you're just off that night. So I usually would try at least a couple of times. A couple of different times. I used to do it at the full moon, and if it didn't work, I'd try to get it the new moon. And then if I still had trouble contacting a goddess, I'd kind of give it a break and wait a while before trying it again. But eventually, I usually got something on everybody. I think there are different levels of trance, too, which are useful for different things. And that's kind of why I spent so much time comparing what I was doing to different types of things I'd read. But I think it might be more similar to what people do doing path working in a tarot card, maybe that level of trance that that I don't think I'm really projecting my astral body out, but it is kind of a projection of the mental complex. And I'm not so much in a trance that I'm totally unaware of what's happening, because if something really happens in the outside world, I'm usually aware of it. And I know some people go into very deep trances for certain things. I found if I go into too deep a trance that I can't really maneuver in the trance world, so to speak, well enough to interact with the gods. But but it's definitely enough of a trance that I usually set off with kind of a standard script and pattern, and then it kind of takes off at some point and starts turning into something that I'm not really controlling. And at that point, that I know that I really am in a real trance.
I want to move to rituals for just a second, because you give detailed instructions for invocations and rituals to call each goddess forth for personal and for group spirit work. There are some who are listening in and maybe wondering what the benefits there are in calling forth a goddess and working one-on-one with her, as opposed to perhaps just calling a spirit guide when we need assistance.
Well, you could call either one. The gods have, I think they have a certain level of power, and especially if it's with a culture that you resonate with the pantheon you resonate with, I think that there can be a connection with them, that they have a lot to teach, or that you can learn a lot about yourself from them.
And depending on who they're... No, go ahead.
I was getting emotional satisfaction working with them. If people feel more comfortable working with a spirit guide and get what they need from that, they could use this for that purpose too.
Exactly.
I do theater. I come from a theatrical background, acting, so theater and ritual are a lot alike, and like I enjoy, and I feel like I get something from that kind of space. So perhaps I enjoy ritual more than some people do, but it's kind of another art. It's like a more active arm of the magical world than tranceworking or meditation. And I think it's useful to have like the active and the more passive together, to get a full experience of what you're doing.
Yeah. I'm trying to get as many questions in before we have to go, because time all of a sudden will start flipping out and going away really fast. So I'm just jumping around here. But you talk about Freya, you've talked about Frigg, and I was reading that perhaps they are one and the same. And then I guess I'm going to give you a two-parter on this, because it's all kind of the same thing. Some of the other Germanic goddesses closely associated with Frigg, like Frau Holda, and the other lesser goddesses like Saga and Fulla, and you say that they are possibly...
I don't want to say lesser, they're just, we don't know that much about them. We'll put it that way.
Okay. Sorry, bad choice of words.
Some people, like, if that's their goddess, that would make them...
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Lesser known is, I thought, what I said, but maybe I didn't. But lesser known is what I meant. Anyway, they say that they're possibly the same goddesses going under different names as well. So there's a whole bunch of different goddesses that people are trying to kind of say, well, this is all just one, and they all have these different aspects. So how do you address that?
I tend to see a lot of them as separate deities rather than to trying to lump them all together, unless, I guess if you want to work with one god and one goddess, you could see it that way. I do see a lot of people working with the Germanic pantheon that, like, they list all these, Germanic gods, but then when they get to the goddesses, they start like, well, they're all really the same person. And it's like, if you have a lot of different gods, I don't see why you can't have different goddesses. There are similarities between Frigg and Freya I have heard people, including scholars, posit the idea that they're really the same one. I really find some really intrinsic differences between them, and just the feel of them, that I definitely think those two are separate goddesses. Some of the others, especially the ones associated with Frigg, some seem very distinct, and it's clear that they are. There are some that could just be, an aspect of Frigg going by a different name, but it just seems like I can learn more about them. I can work with them better to consider them as different.
Yeah.
But that's just my personal take on it.
Yeah.
I'm a polytheist, and I work with the pantheon. There's not really a point to having a pantheon if you're going to make them all the same deity.
Exactly.
So
exactly. Yeah, I just thought, I was looking around and just kind of doing a little bit of research, and I kept having this same theme kind of come up. Well, friggin' Freya, they're really the same, and all the other ones, and I'm like, okay.
Yeah. We don't have enough time to get into the discussion, and there's a lot of points on either side, but that's just my feel for it.
Yeah, they're all, the way you've got the 13 broken down in the book, it's very clear that each has their own personality. The lore about them, I should say, you talk about the lore of each one. You talk about trance, you talk about ritual, you have, how to call them down. It's amazingly complete, but yet not so bad that it's going to mess your brain up. It's simply done. It's easy to read. It just sounds a lot more daunting.
Accessible. I wrote it for people who didn't know, that if you didn't know anything about trance and you didn't know anything about the Norse gods, that it would make sense to you. So that was what I was trying for. For what we were just saying, I would just throw out the idea too, even if you thought maybe two goddesses were really the same person, I would just suggest that if you just treat them in their different aspects like they were different, I think it helps you learn more about them,
Well, yeah, and it's true. Even us, we're all multidimensional.
That's what I mean. So I would just say, even if you think there's a possibility it might be the same goddess, to just kind of suspend your disbelief and treat that other goddess like she was a separate person and see what she has to tell you. Just as a way of working with it might be useful.
And when somebody goes into trance, now people are going to doubt themselves, just like they do when talking to spirit or getting messages from spirit. How do you talk to people and explain to them that they have made a connection and they are actually hearing it rather than imagining it? Because we all doubt ourselves. We're really good at that.
Well, and sometimes one thing I do is I used to keep records of what I did. I kept a journal of what I was doing mundanely before the trance, and also what happened in the trance. And I kind of like people keep a dream diary. Right. And I would go over because sometimes, I will be frank, sometimes things will creep into a trance that later I'll look at and can see that maybe I got that from something I've been reading or something right ahead of time. But over time, because it's not just one trance, but you kind of are collecting a body of data, I think you will find that enough things start showing up that either that were not things that you knew or that would have thought of. Sometimes if you talk to other people that have worked with the same gods, I have had a few things happen that someone else saw independently of me or had the same experience. So I tend to think those things, shows that is something about that goddess that's true, beyond my personal experience. I actually saw something once or twice, something in a trance that I later read in a book that was part of an artifact. So that was kind of exciting. I had seen an image. It turned up on a carving, like from Roman Germany. So that was, those sorts of things. But I think it's just you have to do it enough over time that you really do start seeing that there are things there, or that you're thinking or experiencing things that you just would not have thought of yourself. Things will sometimes, like I think I know a lot about, because I've done gods and goddesses that I know that a lot is known about, and they still will surprise me. So I sometimes those surprises are when the trance goes places that you just weren't prepared for it to. I don't think it can always be just your imagination. Mm-hmm. And your imagination is like one of those links to the world of the gods. So it's a tool. It's not something to distrust necessarily.
Yeah, you just have to open your mind. And I found the cutest saying the other day. It says, "Please open your mind and don't worry, your brains won't fall out." And it's true. I mean, we all kind of,
The other thing I learned about trance is it really is a skill that you can develop. Like, it's not necessarily something you're born with an aptitude for. Or you could be born with an aptitude, but it's something kind of like exercise of playing a musical instrument. Like, I was not very good at it in the 70s, but like I've done it over and over to where I have gotten better at it and can do it more easily, like now, than I could when I started doing this work. So it's like, even if you're not being successful, if you try it enough, that you will actually get better.
Mm-hmm. So it is possible for all of those who say, "Nope, can't do it." All you have to do is decide that
I swear you probably can too.
Practice makes perfect, and but
or better, really, at least.
Yeah, true. But anybody interested in any the trancework things, the ritual and everything, I really recommend that you get the book, because, like we just said, it's written in very simple terms and it's very easy to do. And yeah, that would better than us sitting here trying to explain it forever. It's kind of show and tell. Pick up the book, look at it, and you'll be amazed at what you can do. Now, as I mentioned, time running short, because it always does have a bad habit of doing that around here.
Yes.
I would really like you to tell everybody about your blog, where they can find it, as well as where they can go to learn more about you and your book and coming events and all that good stuff.
Okay. Well, the book is through Inner Traditions. You can find it on their website. It's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, the usual places. I have a blog, madaliceblogspot.com, and I have the Facebook page, Alice Karlsdottir.
And let's spell that for those who are...
ALICEKARLSDOTTIR.
There you go. And what was the blog?
It's madalice at blogspot.com.
Mad Alice, M-A-D?
M-A-D. ALICE. I'm trying to remember if there's a hyphen between Mad and Alice. I haven't looked at the address. It's so wrong.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because in fact I had somebody in chat asking for a website for you, so they want to go and learn more and all that.
Still working on a website.
Yeah, that seems to be the hardest thing. I mean, you get one, I don't know, mine needs updating so badly I might as well not have it.
Yes.
So it's not.
always kind of a fine line between, finding a platform to communicate with people, and like if I spent all my time doing that, then I would spend no time writing or anything. So
exactly, but I've went to your blog page and I was reading some of the blogs, quite interesting. So you're easy to find, and as you said, on Facebook too. So anybody that needs to track you down, there's like 3 different ways, easy enough to do. Okay. Do you have any events coming up or anything else that you want to talk about?
I don't think I have anything definite scheduled right now, but I will post it on one of those places when I do.
Good. That works. All right. Well, we're gonna like slowly tiptoe out of here because otherwise it's like a stampede of buffaloes. You know, everybody's trying to get out at the same time. So anyway, Al, I want to thank you so much for being here tonight. I mean, you've written a terrific book.
Thank you for having.
I appreciate you coming in and sharing Norse goddess magic. And as always, I want to thank everybody for listening in as well. And until next time, everybody, blessed be and merry meet again. Good night.
This has been another edition of Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks. Be sure to tune in next week at this same time for another great guest and more cauldron stirring. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without explicit permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2014. Moonlight Hall by Kevin MacLeod, licensed through Incompetech.com.